The Mets starting rotation is beginning to look like a problem as Frankie Montas had another brutal start. Where do the Mets go from here with this rotation, and did they make a mistake not addressing it at the deadline? I'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order, only valid through September 30th. Now, we're not going to get too in-depth on a game recap as the Mets had a brutal blowout loss on Sunday, and it really all stems from Frankie Montas. He was spotted a 1-0 lead as Francisco Lindor hit a solo homer in the first. Montas put up 2 zeros to start off his day, faced actually the minimum through 2. 6 batters up, 6 batters down. Third inning, it all fell apart. Gave up 4 runs, including a 3-run homer to Rafael Devers. Fourth inning, he gave up 3 more runs. All told, 7 runs on 7 hits and 2 walks. Struck out 3 in 4 innings pitched. Austin Warren came in after that, gave the Mets a chance. 4 scoreless out of the bullpen. Really unbelievable effort for Warren to save the pen, and he'll likely be thanked by getting option back down to Syracuse tomorrow. The Mets got a run on a RBI double by Francisco Alvarez in the 5th, and then 2 more on an Alvarez single in the 9th. Mark Vientos had a double in the 9th inning to extend his hitting streak. Cedric Mullins drew a walk. They both were able to advance. Vientos on a pass ball, Mullins on defensive indifference, and then Alvy had that hit. So a good game by Alvarez. Good to see Lindor homer. Nice that Vientos extended the hitting streak, but the offense didn't do enough. But you're also demoralized when you're spending most of the game trailing 7-2, and it's just a tough hill to climb. Not to mention, the former Mets just killed them in this series. Dom Smith getting big hit after big hit after big hit. Jose Budo, who you just traded to the Giants, he got, 5 outs in this game, 3 strikeouts. Joey Lucchesi just kept on putting up zeros. It's just a series to flush, honestly. But you also have to acknowledge some of the individual performances like Montas and also Ryan Stanek, who had a absolutely brutal 9th inning. After Austin Warren made it look easy for 4, Stanek gives up a base hit and a couple of walks that loaded the bases. Had a chance to get out of it with 2 outs and the bases loaded going up against Dom Smith, who, of course, got an RBI hit that scored 2. Then Casey Schmidt hit a 3-run homer, and that put the game completely out of reach at a 12-2 score at the time. Luis Torrens got the final out for the New York Mets as Stanek just couldn't go any further. So brutal game pitching-wise. But let's really talk about what's happening here, because again, we can dive into it and talk about how Carson Whisenhunt looked pretty good for the Giants, their top prospect or one of their top prospects that came up to make this start. None of that matters. Flush the Giants. You're not going to see them again. It really does not matter. Frankie Montas is brutal right now. He's made 7 starts this season, has given up 4 more runs in 4 of the 7 starts. He has allowed 12 runs across his last 2 starts. It's just been ugly, and it went back-to-back with Kodai Senga having a rough start the day before on Saturday. When you look at Frankie Montas and what he did last year, 4.84 ERA, 10 of his 30 starts, he gave up 4 more runs. He's a guy that is prone to having blow-up starts, and you just don't want to see that. I mean, obviously, any struggles are bad, but being so feast or famine where it's either, hey, I look great, 6 innings, 1 run, or I'm getting shellacked. I mean, you'd rather have the guy that just goes 5 innings every time and gives up 3 runs every time. At least that gives you a chance. He either gives you a chance or he completely loses a game for you. And that's so hard to carry. And you look again at those numbers from last year, 10 of the 30 starts, again, 4 more earned runs. 8 of the 30 starts, he gave up exactly 3 earned runs. So 18 out of 30 starts, he gave up 3 or more. It's just, it never made sense that the Mets signed Frankie Montas. And I went back and I listened to my podcast after they signed him. I was just curious, what was my initial read on this signing? How did I feel about this, whatever it was? At this point, I think it was like a December signing. So 9 months ago, or whenever that deal actually came in. And at the time, I was torn on it because I basically say on the show, I would have absolutely hated this signing if it was any other front office that made it. But on the heels of the 2024 season, what the Mets got out of Sean Manaea and Luis Severino, you were allowed to give the front office the benefit of the doubt at the time because Luis Severino was coming off a worse season than the one that Frankie Montas just put up when the Mets signed Sevy. I mean, he was coming off a year with an ERA over 6 with the Yankees, and he didn't pitch 150 innings. And so at the time, what I basically say in the podcast is if the floor of what you're getting from Frankie Montas is a 4.84 ERA over 150 innings pitched, if that's the floor, and you look at the market for starting pitchers as pretty much any viable starting pitcher can find their way to $15 million unless you're Jose Quintana, which still doesn't make sense. And obviously, in retrospect, the Mets would have been significantly better if they had just signed Quintana and not signed Montas. But, Montas was the first move of the offseason, really. And you thought that you were buying into an arm that was on the other side of a shoulder surgery, finally healthy, had found some stuff with the Brewers. And remember, David Stern's former team traded for Montas last year because they liked the stuff. So it's not surprising that the Mets, who I'm sure are using very similar models and everything else to what the Brewers are using, saw something in Montas. They thought, all right, this is our guy that we can get. Good project. He's going to come over here. We're going to figure him out. And we're going to see the guy that in 2021 was an all-star and pitched to a 3.37 ERA with the A's. That was the ceiling. And so you understood betting on that ceiling when the floor was a stretched out starting pitcher who had just thrown 150 innings. But he gets hurt and he looks horrible on rehab. And now coming back, he has not been good. And you're in this tough position because not only did you give him $17 million this year, you give him a player option for $17 million next year that I don't see him opting out of under any circumstance. And so you're stuck with him. You can't just eat that contract right now. And it'd probably be premature to after only 7 starts, no matter how bad 4 of those 7 starts have looked. You're not going to hit on all these. Griffin Canning was unbelievable before he went down. That was a huge win for the Mets. Clay Holmes has been largely a win. They did, if you look at it that way, they were 2 for 4 in their offseason signings, and one of those misses was Sean Manaea, and I don't think that's actually a miss. It's just a guy that's gotten hurt, and Montas got hurt as well. So, counting in injuries, I don't necessarily want to look back and say, the Mets front office made a brutal mistake in signing this guy, but now you have to address the problem at hand, which is how many more starts can you give Frankie Montas before you have to just stick him in your bullpen as a long man and just move on from it for this season and hope that next year he shows up and he has a good spring and he looks completely different. And maybe next year he's an arm for you. But right now, with what he's looked like, it's really tough to keep on carrying him. The problem is, what do you do? Because there's no trade deadline to fix it. And did the Mets make a mistake at the trade deadline? I want to talk about that in the next segment. What could they have done differently at this deadline if they could have? And then we'll start to get into the steps from here. So we'll talk about all that stuff here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. With the trade deadline this past week, I needed a boost a couple of times, and 5-Hour Energy certainly provided it. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. I love to get there by the end of the season, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Also, hit that notification bell. Make sure you're notified anytime we go live or an episode is dropped. You also have the Locked On Mets postcast that airs on this channel after every Mets game, right after the final out. So if you want the instant reaction to the game, Chris Schubert has got you covered. So make sure you check out that Locked On Mets postcast. Now, let's talk about this trade deadline. If the New York Mets made a mistake, I know the general fan reaction on a Monday after Kodai Senga has a bad start and Frankie Montas has a horrible start, and it's the Monday after the trade deadline is, why in the world did the New York Mets not trade for a starting pitcher? They blew it. They should have got somebody. What happened? I've talked about this briefly during and since the deadline, that there just was not a lot of starting pitching to be had in this market, because you look up after the dust settled and who really got moved that could have helped this Mets rotation. Chris Paddock, Charlie Morton, Mike Soroka, Bailey Falter. I mean, Falter maybe, and he got traded for next to nothing. So, yeah, if you look at each individual deal, but that's not how trades always work. Bailey Falter might not have been shopped to all 30 teams. There just might have been a conversation with, Ben Cherington for the Pirates. I don't even know who the Royals GM is. Is it the same guy that's been there forever? It's JJ Piccolo. Those two guys get on the phone close to the deadline, and Piccolo picks Cherington's pocket on Falter. But even then, Bailey Falter, while he's been great this year, like an ERA in the 3.7 range, I don't know if David Stearns would want Bailey Falter for the next 3 years. Bailey Falter, you would hope, would not be a good enough starting pitcher to be in this rotation longer term, because he's a back end arm and you have all these top prospects that are going to filter in sooner than later. And so I understand if you were looking for that ceiling raising move, which is what David Stearns said, that's his word. The Mets were looking for starting pitchers at the deadline that could raise their ceiling. That did not exist. It didn't. There was 2 starting pitchers that were moved, only 2, that would have raised the ceiling for the Mets: Shane Bieber and Merrill Kelly. And when we look at the individual packages, it makes sense the Mets could not pull off a trade for one of the two starting pitchers that would have helped them that got moved. Shane Bieber, you're also dealing with the fact that he's coming off Tommy John, but he's looked great in his rehab so far. He would not have fixed the problem right away because he is still working his way back. Probably takes another 2 weeks, I would think, before Shane Bieber makes his first start. And then we'll see how he does. But I was on the Shane Bieber bandwagon leading into the deadline. I talked about him on the show a couple of times. I really like that fit, but they end up getting Cal Steven for him. Now, Cal Steven, prospect, for the Blue Jays, second round pick last year, at a 2.06 ERA with 99 strikeouts and 91 and 2/3 innings pitched, and he's in Double-A right now. So for the Mets to beat that trade package, they either would have had to put 2 arms together that were, more valuable collectively than Steven. And honestly, the Guardians probably would still have just chosen the best possible arm they could get. If the Mets were going to top that package, they would have had to give up one of their top 3 arms. And if you really are talking about overpays at this deadline, when you consider the fact that there's a good chance that if Bieber pitches well, he's going to opt out of his player option for next season. If he doesn't, well, he didn't pitch well for you when you needed him to. And then you get him back for next year. Maybe next year Shane Bieber proves to be worth the investment. But I wouldn't want to give up all of the control of Jonah Tong for, not even a full 2 months, 6 weeks of Shane Bieber, and then hopefully is good enough to make a playoff start. When you look at the cost, it didn't make sense to make that move. Then you look at the Merrill Kelly trade. And look, Merrill Kelly would have absolutely helped the Mets. You plug him into that rotation, he right now would be your number 2. Because you still are dealing with question marks on Manai and Senga. I think ultimately those guys would hopefully push Kelly down the pecking order. But, this guy's pitching to a low 3s ERA, eating up innings. He's been great this year. Goes to the Rangers in his first start this weekend, right after the deadline. He was also outstanding. I think he gave up 1 infield hit through his first 5 innings pitched. And then, let's see what he gave up in the 6th. He gave up a couple runs, I guess. But won his first start for the Rangers. Yeah, gave 2 runs, went 5 2/3. So overall, this definitely would have been the guy to get. But then what did it take for the Rangers to pull off the deal? Took 3 pitching prospects, all starting pitchers, one in AAA, one in AA, one in high A. All right, so the Mets have pitching prospects that they can absolutely deal, but now you're dipping into Jack Weninger, Jonathan Santucci, prospects that you maybe don't want to give up, that next wave behind your top three in your system. You look at what the Mets traded at this deadline. When it comes to starting pitchers, they maybe traded 3 future starting pitchers collectively across the 4 deals. You have Wellington Aracena in the first trade to get Gregory Soto, and I still think he might end up being a reliever. Cameron Foster was also a reliever in that trade. The Tyler Rogers trade, you could say that Jose Budo might get stretched out to be a starter next year, but he's not a starting pitching prospect. He's a reliever right now. Drew Gilbert is an outfielder, and the Diamondbacks would not have wanted Drew Gilbert. And Blade Tidwell is a starting pitcher for now, but honestly, I think it's more likely that he ends up being a reliever in the long run. And I don't even remember which guy was the AAA arm, but I looked at all of them, and all the arms the Rangers got in the deal, 2 lefties and a righty, again, 1 in AAA, 1 in AA, 1 in high A. They all had ERAs in the low 3s, or the guy in high A had an ERA in the high 2s. So the point being, the AAA pitching prospect that was in the deal to get Merrill Kelly, I would think he's probably better than Blade Tidwell. I'm speaking out of a little bit of ignorance. I don't know these prospects as well as the Mets prospects, but the point stands. If the Mets were going to try to put together a package for Merrill Kelly based on what they traded at the deadline, I don't even know if they had the collective starting pitchers that would have gotten the deal done, that would have matched what the Rangers gave up to get Kelly. Because Tidwell, I don't think he's as good as the AAA arm. I think Nate Dom is as good as the AA arm. But I don't even know. Was he up in AA? Now I'm like drawn to. I think he did come up to AA. He spent most of the year in high A, if I'm not mistaken. But I believe he did get up to double. No, he was in high A. Or at least he's in high A with the Cardinals now. He 3 teams now has pitched for. Got his first start in Peoria. Yeah. He made 7 starts in low A, had a really good start to his season, 2nd-round pick last year, and then 11 games, 10 starts in high A. So there you go. Not even a AA arm. And then the other starting pitcher that you dealt was Aracena, who's in low A. So point being, with the pitching the Mets gave up at this deadline, they did not give up 3 starting pitchers. Aracena, maybe. Tidwell, maybe. Dom, I think so. But again, the point is, like, to say, oh, the Mets should have traded for Merrill Kelly instead of Ryan Helsley. For one, I don't even know if I agree with that. But I don't know if the Helsley package gets you Merrill Kelly, because what the Diamondbacks wanted was pitching, and particularly starting pitching. And the Mets did not move very many starters. They moved a lot of relief pitching prospects, and then they moved Drew Gilbert and Jesus Baez were the 2 position players that they dealt that were probably, in the grand scheme of things, the 2 biggest prospects that were traded at this deadline. So the point is, did the Mets make a mistake at this deadline not addressing their rotation? I just don't think that it was something they could have addressed. And I think the market has showed us that. There was 2 guys that got dealt for packages that were probably more rich than the Mets would have wanted to give up. So then that brings us back to this current team. How much rope do you give Frankie Montas? What do you do with this team? And when do you see the top prospects come up? Because if part of the reason that you didn't put together the compelling package for a Joe Ryan or a Mackenzie Gore, an Edward Cabrera or a Sandy Alcantara, and honestly, all of those guys might have been way too steep of a price to meet, even if you put one of your top 2 pitching prospects on the table. But that would have been the starting point in any deal. If the Mets had put Jonah Tong on the table, they probably could have opened up some doors. But with that said, if part of the calculus for the Mets was, we don't want to give up any of these 3 guys, and we think that there's a chance that McLean and Sproat can help us this year, then when are you going to go to that? How long are you going to wait before you actually decide to call up these guys that have been carving up in AAA and look like they're big league ready, and potentially a significant upgrade over a guy like Montas, who is giving up 4 runs every other start, if not more than that? When do you make the move? That's what I want to talk about to close out the show. Are we going to see the top pitching prospects? And also, how do you factor in Paul Blackburn and all of that? So we'll get to that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, whether they're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, or you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. We're not going to do a full series preview today because I wanted to spend enough time on this conversation about the starting rotation, but I will tell you the pitching matchups for this series. You got Sean Manaea going up against Slade Cinconi for tonight's game, Logan Allen versus Clay Holmes, and then Gavin Williams versus David Peterson. We will do individual game previews throughout the series as I'll be doing shows obviously after each game, but to just give you a little bit of a look into this one, Slade Cinconi has a 3.77 ERA in the season. It's been very solid for the guards. Made 13 starts, 63 strikeouts, and 76 and a third innings pitched. So not the biggest strikeout artist, more of a guy that's going to try to induce that soft contact. Hopefully a pitcher that the Mets can end up putting up some big numbers against. If you remember, he was actually with the Diamondbacks for a couple years before this and then was moved to the Guardians. I can't remember what trade that was, but it doesn't really matter. Let's get back to the problem at hand, which is this Mets rotation. Now, we'll see Sean Manaea go tonight. And I think you look at Manaea, and while you might have some questions about the health, pitching with that bone spur in his elbow, he's made 4 appearances this year. He's allowed just one earned run each time. To me, Manaea has looked good, and I'm not too concerned about his effectiveness. I'm a little bit concerned about, is he going to stay healthy the rest of the year? But his effectiveness, I'm not worried about. David Peterson, obviously zero concerns. The other 3 in this rotation right now, you can start to have questions, but with Kodai Senga, I don't think there's any decisions to be made. You're going to ride it out, and I feel like he's eventually going to lock in his mechanics, and he'll be just fine, but we'll see how long his struggles continue. This comes down to Montas and Holmes. And with Holmes, I've been talking about this idea of shorting him up for about a week now, where his last start, it was rough, and he did make it out of the 4th inning, and he just could not find the zone, and it seems like he really has hit a wall. Now, we first learned of him hitting any kind of wall in Colorado, where he had that start. I think he went 6 innings, but told him as that he was feeling some fatigue. At that point, he was at 73 innings, which is kind of crazy because you talk about how you throw innings limits out these days, and he's in a new role, and he's stretched out, and all these things. That's about what he has thrown throughout his career. So the fact that he was pitching to a 2.95 ERA through his first 73 innings. And then from that point on, we've seen a different version of Clay Holmes. It is kind of indicative of the fact that this is a guy that has entered ranges of innings that he has never seen before. And that's a lot of strain. And that's a completely different season to go through mentally, where you have already thrown way more innings than you ever had. And now you still are trying to stay in this starting pitching routine and figure it out and work your way and navigate through starts. And it's just been a lot more difficult for him. But there is a chance that the wall that he's hit now, that he still could get through it. And the more that I actually look at what Clay Holmes has been doing since that first time that we heard about fatigue, maybe it is worth keeping him in the rotation. Maybe it doesn't make sense to shorten him up. Maybe what you have to look at is Montas and say, maybe this guy just has to go into your bullpen as the long man and you figure something else out, because despite the fact that Holmes has not been the guy that he was prior to that wall that he hit in Colorado, he's made 9 starts since then. He's gone 5 innings in 7 of those 9 starts. He's allowed more than 2 earned runs in only 3 of those 9 starts. And he certainly hasn't given up 7 runs at a start the way Montas just did. Last time out, he gave 4 runs, only 2 of them were earned. He was pulled in the 4th inning for the first time all season. So if he's going to pitch into the 5th nearly every time, and we'll see what happens this week, all of a sudden you look at this super bullpen you've built. Clay Holmes is sort of the perfect pitcher for it, because if he's 5-and-die, but 5-and-die with a lead, you got the arms to finish off all these games in a way that you didn't prior. Now, if you're only getting 5 innings out of Holmes, you're getting sometimes 4 innings out of Montas. Kodai Senga is not giving you length. Sean Manaea is not giving you length. At a certain point, you're going to run into some problems, but I think Manaea will give you more length as he continues to go. I feel like last time he could have gotten a 6th inning, but Carlos Mendoza wasn't going to push him. But I think he will get to that point where he is giving you 6-7 innings, and having 2 guys who are doing that with Manaea and Peterson is going to go a long way. And we know Kodai Senga, if he locks back in, he will eat innings. So now all of a sudden, it completely changed the complexion of your rotation if you have 3 guys doing it. And if you got 3 guys that are giving you length, and you got Holmes going 5-and-dive, but giving you a chance with each of those 5 innings that he's pitching, you're fine. You're fine with 4/5 of your rotation. And then it just goes back to Montas. And how long do you let him go? But I just don't think the Mets are going to make a reactionary move right now. It's just not the way they operate. I don't think that they're going to. Granted, you could say they should. And then when you have Paul Blackburn as this option that's waiting in the wings, I do wonder, would the Mets be better off with Blackburn in their rotation over Montas? And Montas in the bullpen? Because Blackburn, I mean, let's be honest, he sucked in the bullpen. And he has already talked about how he didn't feel comfortable in that role. Now, Montas hasn't really pitched out of the bullpen in his career, so I don't know if he'd be much better, but he's at least got an arsenal that makes some sense out of the bullpen. Now, all of a sudden, maybe he's throwing a little bit harder in shorter spurts. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And you're talking about whoever that guy is pitching in absolutely no leverage whatsoever. I mean, yeah, you have the arms that you would never need. That starting pitcher that's in your bullpen, which should happen this week at some point. Like, you're not going to be able to give another start to Blackburn in rehab purgatory. You got to call him up. Like, this is it. He can't make another one. He's not allowed to at this point. So this is the time for him. It's just, what do you do? And then how do the prospects fit into it? That's why here I am. This segment's supposed to be about one of the prospects going to factor in. But you have 6 big league starting pitchers on your depth chart, and you have 7 guys locked into your bullpen. So what do you do? How do you get the prospects worked in there? I talked about the idea of Nolan McLean piggybacking Clay Holmes. I still think there's an outside shot we see that, because they both pitched on the same day. You could make the case for shortening up Holmes and having McLean come up in a little bit of a softer landing spot as the guy that follows up Holmes' start. It could make some sense. But you either do that for a day and send McLean down, which again goes against what David Stern said earlier this season, where you don't necessarily want to have a top prospect come up for a spot start or a spot relief, bulk relief outing, which is what that would amount to. So I don't think you're going to do that. Now, you have an off day on Thursday. You have an off day on Monday after that. So you could pitch a man down in the bullpen. But then when you have to bring Blackburn up, what do you do? Or do you DFA Blackburn and let another team have him? But can you really justify DFAing him with the current depth that you have? I mean, Tyler McGill could be an option for the Mets in September, so I don't want to completely forget about him. But he still has yet to make a rehab start, so it's not like that's anywhere close. I don't think you're going to cut him. I certainly don't think you're going to cut Montas and eat that contract. So now you have Montas and Blackburn that are blocking the prospects. The only thing you could do is you could free up another spot in the bullpen by cutting Ryan Stanek. And that's the other side of it, right? Maybe you cut Stanek so that you have room to cover one of the kids. Or you have room to promote one of the kids and put them on the roster. But Ryan Stanek, you signed him for the playoffs. Otherwise, you would have just exercised that option on Phil Maton, and they should have just exercised the option on Phil Maton. Stanek has a career 2.89 ERA in the playoffs. His ERA in the regular season is about a run worse. Last year, he was great in the playoffs. But people forget he pitched to a 6.06 ERA in the regular season with the Mets after the trade deadline. Was not good. Then he was nails in October. Streaky pitcher this year as well. 5.59 ERA in April, 1.04 ERA in May, 6.29 ERA in June, 2.79 ERA in July, and now a 32.40 ERA in August because of 2 appearances, and he just gave up 5 runs. But I just don't know if I see the Mets cutting him either. I really don't. Eventually, maybe. Left off a playoff roster, possibly. But right now, I don't know if I can see them doing that. I think they just try to avoid pitching him in leverage. I think that's what they probably do. Try to pitch him when you're losing, like they did today and like they did on Friday. So I don't think we're going to see a reactionary move right now is the bottom line. I don't think we're going to see it. I don't think we're going to see a prospect this week. I hope I'm wrong. I hope what I've been talking about with having McLean piggyback Holmes happens. That would be amazing. I just don't think it's going to. I think the Mets are still looking at this rotation and saying, all right, Manaea and Senga will be better. David Peterson's solid. Clay Holmes, while he has struggled getting deep into games, if he's a 5-and-dive pitcher that's given up 2 earned runs or less, that's what this bullpen, is made for. The question really just comes down to Montas, and 7 starts into this season. I don't know if they pulled the ripcord on him. If they do, I don't think it's necessary for McLean. I think it's because they have Paul Blackburn ready to go, and I don't think it's for Sproat either. And by the way, between those two, I don't even know which one would get the nod first because Brandon Sproat has been so good lately that you might just think that he makes more sense to come up first. But I digress on that. At this stage, I think it's more likely that we see Paul Blackburn make a start before we see one of the kids make a start. I know that's frustrating, but at the same time, Paul Blackburn's first start this year was a really good one. Let me pull up exactly what he did against the Dodgers, but that was in LA, and Paul Blackburn went out there and he put up 5 scoreless innings against that Dodgers lineup, 3 hits, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts. Then he pitched out of the bullpen, gave up 3 runs on 7 hits, but finished that game against the Rockies. That was a pretty good effort. He had a disastrous outing out of the bullpen against the Rays, a disastrous start, a bad start against the Braves, another bad start against the Braves, and then a bad relief appearance, and then he was out of there. You look at it, though, he still hasn't given up 7 runs in an appearance this year, so maybe do that. You compare Paul Blackburn, his numbers in Syracuse, though, to Frankie Montas and his numbers on rehab, and Paul Blackburn was pitching very well in Syracuse. I know it's Syracuse, but I have more confidence handing the ball to Blackburn for a start tomorrow if I had to. So maybe that's what the Mets do. Maybe they have Blackburn take a start in that series against the Brewers. You're going to have, again, for this upcoming series, you got Manaea, Holmes, Peterson. The next series, it stands to reason that you would have Manaea pitch, Senga pitch, and Montas pitch. Not in that order. It would be Senga, Montas, Manaea. Maybe instead you go Senga, Blackburn, Manaea, and Montas is going to pitch out of the pen in that series against the Brewers. Maybe that's what the Mets decide to do. And if Montas pitches well in that role, maybe he just has to stomach it and be a reliever for the rest of the year. Or we could see the Mets go to a 6-man rotation with Blackburn. Wouldn't love it, but we could see it. Would love it, especially when you have 2 off days sandwiching a series, which you never see that. It's a weird spot to be in. It really is. It's hard for me to predict what the Mets are going to do. If I had to guess, though, I don't think we see a top prospect for at least a couple more weeks. I know it's frustrating, but I think you'd have to see. I think at least for this week, they're probably going to just keep this rotation as is and most likely stick Blackburn in the bullpen. But it can go either way. It's tough. It's tough because personally, if it was up to me, I think I would stick Montas in the bullpen and let Blackburn get that start on Saturday. But I don't know if they'll do that. I really don't think they will. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. The Mets are going to have a 3-game series right now against the Guardians at home, and then there's that day off before they go to Milwaukee. So we'll be doing shows, of course, every single day throughout the week. I'll give you a little more of a preview of the rest of the series on tomorrow's show, likely, of course, recapping the game as well and talking about anything noteworthy that might have come up beyond that. But I appreciate all of you again for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on the audio side, I already said that. Follow, rate, and review. As always, thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts, as well as league-wide experts that'll take you through all of the action. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.